Hello, this is my review of the Leaving Cert Mathematics Ordinary Level Paper 1. So I went through the higher level paper for both the Leaving Cert Junior Cert, so now I just have the Leaving Cert Ordinary paper. I am choosing not to do the Junior Cert Ordinary paper because I don't currently have anyone that I'm tutoring who is Junior Cert Ordinary Level. So, this is the exact same format as the higher paper. There's 6 questions section A, 4 in section B. You can leave one out for all the best marks. So question 1, as is very standard, is something about finance. So here it was on the topic of VAT. And then discounts. And then there was this idea of... this question kind of hinted at the fact that you just have to find the lowest common multiple of 9 and 12. And then the fairly standard, if they work together, how long is it going to take them? So this question you should have done time aplenty. Now, in the second question, complex numbers as always, fairly okay. Complex numbers question asks for the modulus, comparing moduli, and then writing a complex number as a fraction and then seeing what that's equivalent to. So again, pretty bog standard. Now, question 3 was another little tiny bit of finance at the beginning. So just comparing two different offers. And then solving a fairly standard inequality. Now, part C might have been a little bit challenging. Just finding two numbers that multiply to 12 and then solving an equation involving k and t. Don't have a particular value of b. Now, depending on your values of k and t, they're going to accept various different values of b. So if you're the kind of person to come out of an exam and ask people what they got, 7 here works, 8 also works, so you had a bunch of different answers there that you could have chosen. Question 4, solving an equation. This is a fairly standard equation. I would think any junior cert student would be okay at solving that. And then finding a derivative and slope of a tangent. It is, again, that's a fairly common thing to be asked, so you should have been able to do this no problem, even if it's with a cubic. Okay, and then there's this question which I found quite interesting. So it just tested if you know what a derivative actually is. So obviously the derivative being the slope of the tangent at a particular point. So that's a fairly nice little theory question. Question 5 is simultaneous and then going into solving a quadratic. So again, pretty bog standard stuff there. And then part C was about another quadratic. And I think this question was a bit interesting because it essentially just gauged, again, a lot of theoretical knowledge about quadratics as opposed to can you just crunch the numbers, which I find is a thing they've been including a lot, especially in the ordinary papers. And then you effectively had to turn these into factors, expand, take a derivative, or you could note that the minimum is actually just the midpoint of the two roots. Okay, question 6, the last one. Another little bit of finance here. So that's one full finance question and then 2 bits where they're kind of intertwined. So profit and margin, that's all stuff you should have done before, or at least seen. And then writing numbers in scientific notation and then doing it again, but with a tiny little calculation this time. It's physics, so I automatically kind of have to like it. It's calculating how long a light year is in kilometers, which I think it's quite cool. So overall, it's just a very stereotypical section A. It's got all the stuff in it that you would expect in a section A, with a lot more theory than what came up in the past. So I think any student who understood the concepts more than was able to carry out calculations found this paper rather good. And everyone else that was just about crunching numbers, when they see a word and doing a specific calculation, they might have found the theory bits a bit difficult. Now, section B, again, they're trying to get these questions into a a very sort of modern stuff. This is one about a share price, and then just kind of analyzing the graph. Then pretty much just a lot of graph stuff here in reference to this little section here. So not too bad, little bits. And then it's pretty much plotting the graph of a different company against this one and seeing which one is doing better when. Or when it's actually equal at that point. Then it's just creating new functions based on old stuff. So this is a lot of essentially functional analysis where, again, it's a lot of theory. You kind of have to know how functions intertwine with each other and, what adding or subtracting different terms do to kind of main functions. So I think that's again, a nice question for people who understood theory a lot more than the number crunching. Now, question 8, talking about parts of a phone, standard quadratic stuff again, sketching a graph and doing some estimation. Again, another graph where we have a derivative, so again, that should be okay for people. And then part C is another one where it's comparing a profit to something else. Okay, so again, it's another functional analysis question, but if you've done a lot with quadratics, it should pretty much just be a bog standard question. Question 9, again, another finances question at the beginning. And then it goes into patterns for whatever reason. So I'm not sure why they're like kind of stringing in all these random finance stuff. But anyway, this is a fairly intriguing question. I'm talking about essentially forming what we actually call a minimum spanning, or not minimum spanning tree, a complete graph in graph theory. For those of you who do applied maths, these are examples of complete graphs. And then it's just essentially comparing and extrapolating information to, say, the one with 740 dots. Okay, so an interesting question that was a lot shorter than the rest of them, but again, required a little bit of thinking, especially for part B there. And question 10, scale drawing. That's fairly okay to do, working a surface area. And then currency exchange, which again, it seems to be a thing that they're adding finance questions to every single part. So if you haven't done very well in terms of financial maths, then you might have found that this was quite a difficult paper, which I think is a bit unfair, having one topic in pretty much every single question. But that's the SEC. Then here's another one with just another function and inequalities question. So, in fairness, I know this review wasn't as deep, but a lot of the questions are very stereotypical, except for the fact that every single one of them pretty much had a financial maths question in there for whatever reason. So, if you didn't like financial maths and didn't really understand the theory of a lot of the stuff on the course, you might have found this to be quite a god-awful paper, because they were the two main bits, the main two takeaways of this paper. So, whereas I gave the Leaving Cert higher level one high praise, I wouldn't give this one such a high praise. I would consider this probably about a 5 or a 6 out of 10, because there's a lot wrong with it, but I can see the positives in that it's a fairly repeatable exam. So the questions are kind of in their designated spots as per all the previous exams. So yeah, I can understand if people came out of this a little bit frustrated with the question content, but I believe, especially in my own students, that they should have done fine. So make sure to study up well for paper 2 on Monday morning.